everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Dine and Dish, and happy July. It's almost the end of summer already, and soon we're going to be talking about back to school, which is crazy. I mean, summer goes so fast. But we're going to jump right into the show today. I have another fellow restaurateur and franchisor and business scaling entrepreneur on the line, and we're gonna talk restaurant biz today. So with further ado, Mike, hello, welcome to Dine and Dish.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So before we jump into the show, let's get you introduced. You've been with California Tortilla. It's a really cool, unique brand, and we're going to talk about their mentality and growth and stability. It's kind of in line with what we do with Squisito. So I'm really excited to talk through that. But I'm going to turn the mic over to you for a couple minutes just so you can let the listeners know a little bit about who you are, why you joined our crazy restaurant biz world, and talk through your journey.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, I think like a lot of us, I was initially introduced into the industry going through school. Kind of putting myself through college, getting some part-time work, and working as a server and as a bartender. And so you kind of get the bug, right? So you get that instant gratification of money. I always call it's like that instant dopamine hit. You get that $5, $10, $20, and you're kind of hooked. And once I got out of college, I still kind of had that aspiration of, wow, I really enjoyed my time in restaurants. And I also had this kind of entrepreneur flair. And I knew that I eventually wanted to get back into restaurants, but it was kind of a circuitous route in the sense of when I got out, I was, just wanting to do my own thing. And not that I had any money at the time, but me and one of my college roommates, and we were living with a bunch of other college guys at that time in Northern Virginia. And we just kind of started going through one of these big books about, like 1,000 franchise ventures. And we'd go, we were kind of going page by page, like, what could we do? Dry cleaners, bagel shops, on maintenance. And long story
Isn't that
short,
funny? I think a lot of people do that. It's like, oh, what's like the big thing? You look at parking garages, I mean,
Mhm.
laundry mats. It's like you always look for things that don't have high rents. You don't, those, what do they call it? Not a ton of payroll. You look for things that have low over operating costs and higher yield, right? I mean, that's what I hear all the time. Everybody's always looking for what's the next big franchise.
Mhm. And I think also things that you can understand, right? I mean, if you were to say
Yeah.
right now, hey, hey, let's open a dentist office. It's like, well, unless you've got a specialty skill on that, or
Yeah.
go be a computer programmer. It's like, well, you need to have, again, these specialty skills. But what can you do as an entrepreneur? And then, kind of long story short, we ended up becoming franchisees with Exxon Mobil. My roommate at the time was kind of going through the MIT process with Exxon and learning to be a manager, and this one store in Southern Maryland came up for sale that he was working with the owner, and just came to me and said, hey, what do you think if we put in a bid to become a franchisee for this location that's selling? It was basically brand new. It had only been open a couple months. So, of course, you might say, well, how does that make sense? But it makes sense if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to figure out how to make money, right? And so, again, I think my balance sheet at the time, I was 24. I think the only thing I had of value was a 9-year-old Corolla that my parents gave me for college graduation, so I could get to and from, whatever job I had. So that was it. So same thing with my business partner. So we put together a business plan, and we kind of sold that to, as many people as we knew, friends, family. Here's what we need to, the money we need to raise. And we did. And we were also then, we were interviewed by, of course, you got to get approved by Exxon, which was, kind of a daunting process. But, we made it through. And at the time we were 24. We were the youngest franchisees for Exxon in the state of Maryland. So we were down in La Plata.
Okay.
Uh,
I know the Plata, of course.
yeah. So on 301, so on the main drag down there.
Mhm.
So it actually just turned into a dash in. But that was, yeah,
Well, you're talking my LA weight loss years. I had an office down in Waldorf and La Plata back when I was in weight loss. So I know the area very well.
nice, nice, yeah. So so we did that for a number of years. That's really kind of where I learned operations, the business operations. One of the things that I credit Exxon for is that they had systems in place. And I really bought into those systems as a young franchisee. I didn't know really anything about retail fuel or business or anything of that nature. I mean, I knew that I wanted to be successful. So I just kind of vowed to follow the systems to a T. And even, let's fast forward, to, present day. I mean, that's really what I preach to my franchisees is you have to follow the systems. I mean, don't break them. If you have a suggestion, I definitely will take it. Well, we're always trying to better our systems, but you have to buy in, and even like in our what we call discovery days, if we have a potential franchisee that comes in for a day and we interview them, and I really kind of kick the tires and say, can you follow these rules? And of course we want as many franchisees as we can, but we also want the right franchisees.
Yeah,
But
that's so important. So before we jump into the whole franchising piece and systems, because that's so important, and we're going to talk through that because I'm such a stickler for systems as well. What attracted? So let's kind of talk a little bit about California Tortilla. So what attracted you to them? How long have you been with them? And what's your role with them right now?
Yeah, sure. So I am the vice president of operations and development. So I oversee all the franchise stores and corporate stores. Kind of set the strategy and just kind of run all the parts, the mechanism. I've been with them for 8 years now.
Okay, great. So it's interesting. You said something that is very I brought it up on, I think, probably 4 or 5 shows in the last year. Everybody at some point in their journey works in the restaurant business, whether
Hmm.
it's a bartender or server, whatever, in the kitchen. It just creates such basic training techniques. It's like you work hard, but you learn so much, and it just gives you skills. It gives you customer service skills. It gives you system skills. It just gives you basics. And I interviewed a guest, I think it was like 6 or 7 months ago. I don't remember. And now he's a consultant in the restaurant world. And he was so funny. He said to me, "Hey, I always thought if I wound up in the restaurant business, I failed. Because, back in the day when you're a kid, you're like working as a server or bartender. And they always said, God, I can never stay in this industry and grow up in this industry. And now, I'm on this show, I'm bringing on executives and, just peers like yourself. And we're in this, and this is our role, and this is our responsibility, and this is our career. And, we looked at it and we were laughing together. And I said, I never thought I'd still be in the restaurant business 40 years later, So, but the soft skills you learn and just, I mean, like you said, it's passionate, you love it, and we stay with it. But to digress, let's get back to California Tortilla for a second. So, what I love about the brand, and I was doing some research about you and what you do, I love the fact that they're really focused and deliberately on strategy. It's not just about, how it is in the franchise world. It's like, let's just sell as many as we can. We can have 100 sold or 500 in development or 3,000 in development. It makes the brand look better. But what I love about the mentality, and the same thing in our mentality, it's about bringing on successful franchisees, right? Because if the franchisee is successful, growth is successful, your brand is successful, and then you continue brand recognition. So I want you to talk through that a little bit, because the deliberate strategy that you guys set in your growth expansion is very unique in the franchise world.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it can be difficult. When I first came in, I had a lot of franchisees that I invited to leave. I'll put it
What
bluntly.
did you say? You invited to leave?
I invited them to leave. So I said, look, and that was part of the reason why I came in. We kind of need a new perspective, new leadership, and there was a lot of franchisees that just weren't meeting the goal. And as leases expired, some of these franchisees, typically will have a 10-year lease. And as these leases expired, would we had to make decisions, and they had to make decisions too if they wanted to move forward. But I think you said the word that strikes with me is brand. Okay, so I think every brand has a very specific DNA. It's like a person, and if and that's what one of the things I'll tell people on Discovery Days. It's like we want this brand, this person, to be a very specific, and identifiable. And if I have a franchisee that comes in and changes that, it changes the DNA. I mean, it's from anything to uniform standards or cleanliness standards or how they cook the food or buy the food even I've had franchisees before ask if they could change the color of the restaurant. And I've said, of course, no. I mean,
Sure. You can just make it any color you want.
yeah, yeah.
Some of these questions, doesn't it make you wonder what goes through their mind? Or, like we're Italian and they want to serve steaks. I mean, I've also had the gamut of questions. So I feel your pain there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, you appreciate it in one sense because they're not entrepreneurs. But again, I try to, the more and more we've brought in new franchisees, I really try to hone in on that person that's going to be successful with me and with the brand. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that can be a difficult process, but yeah, and you have to just kind of be true to that. It's like you can be an entrepreneur, and where I always try to push them because it's kind of like it's like an itch you can't scratch, right? So if you're like, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, I've got to do something that identifies me as an entrepreneur, and I really then kind of focus on how do you build business then? How do you get out in the community? How do you scratch that itch? And not, hey, I want to bring in, to your point, steaks. I can't tell you how many times somebody wants to bring in a new menu item. I had a franchisee in Wichita, and I walked into their location, and they had a coffee pot. Now you might think that's pretty benign, but I was like, oh, this isn't the DNA. Oh, well, people that come in early like to have a cup of coffee. No, 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 no. We're fast casual Mexican, so
You
that
can't be
doesn't.
Starbucks too.
No, we can't be, and so you have to stay tried and true to that brand, and say immediately you have to remove that coffee. So. But yeah, but that's where I push them in, on the sales building piece of being an entrepreneur, and that's where, I think that they thrive when they really do well.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talked about the whole coffee and adding different pieces. The other thing they don't realize as well is there might be exclusives on the lease. There might be another coffee shop in that shopping center that could really cause an issue for your brand. They're doing something that they shouldn't be that could negatively impact the brand with the relationship of your landlords or long-term partners that you use in multiple cities. So, I think sometimes, like you said, the franchisee is entrepreneurial minded in spirit that they don't realize sometimes um, the repercussion. It's like the domino. You do one thing and then it falls down the line. They don't see that big picture sometimes. They just look at it like, oh, well, this is really cool. It can make us more money. Everybody wins in the end, but they don't look at it as okay, everybody is the same. It's consistent. We don't have one location. We have 70 locations or 15, and everybody should be the same, and that's why you document it. And systems are so important. And we'll talk about systems and foundations of success in just a couple of minutes. But that operational consistency is so important. I mean, we had a franchisee, and I got to tell you a funny story. I'm going to digress for a second. I do this all the time. These stories pop into my head, and I'm like, I got to tell the story. So we had a franchisee in Virginia. This is right before COVID, and you get those problem customers. They come in and there's an issue, and I guess she was a little more problematic than the normal, and I get this call in my office and an email, and she's like, your franchisee's horrible. He was rude and he paid me to leave the store. And I go, what? What do you mean? And she's like, yeah, he wrote me a check from the restaurant to go eat somewhere else and to leave the store. And I said, oh, perfect. That's the perfect way to handle a customer complaint. And, you go through training, like you said, you give them systems, you give them all the tools that they need in order to be successful when whether it's refunds, customer service, opening your store, marketing, branding, all the things that we talk about. But he just felt it was just more in his beneficial to write the lady a check for $50 and say, go eat somewhere else. I was like, that's the perfect opportunity. Anyway, so I'm sure you probably have the same crazy stories that I do, but let's go back to talk about success and foundation and not the interesting crazy franchise stories. So talk to me through how you keep operation success and consistency throughout 70 stores, because that's important. It's easy when you have one in one geographical location like Maryland and Virginia, but when you start getting into other states that are flying and getting on planes and trains, how do you keep them consistent within all your franchisees? Because that's probably, I would think, the most challenging, correct?
Yeah, well, I think it's about having the right team. So I have franchise consultants and a director of operations and a team, new store opening teams. I kind of go back to I had kind of mentor back in the day, and they said the hardest thing that they ever did in their career was go from one store to two stores, and they'd gone from 50 to 70 or 80 to 100, and that was easy. And I found it to be the very same thing. So when I was a franchisee at Exxon, we signed a franchise agreement as well with another company called Coffee Beanery. So we had opened up a coffee beanery in Arlington, Virginia, and we had the Exxon in Southern Maryland, and we were looking to grow. And that was the hardest thing I ever did because I had to kind of duplicate myself. I didn't have the competency yet to be a multi unit operator. But then, as I grew, went through, my career and went into restaurants with Glory Days Grill, and I was running 20 Glory Days Grills, and I went to Caribou Coffee, went to 70. It was the easiest thing I ever did was to go from 20 to 70. Now the same thing with any group is like it's about the managing a team. So at even at Caribou, I had 8 district managers, I had a couple marketing specialists, a couple training specialists. So it was about managing the team. So it's the same thing here. It's about managing the team. But there's also the check-ins I will do. There's the KPIs that I look at to make sure that the team is staying on. But it's really about the team dynamic and not necessarily the number, because the number can go from 10 to 1,000. It's still about that same process of managing the team.
Yeah. So when you talk about key performance indicators, and I'm going to say what KPIs are because not everybody listening knows
Sure.
lingo.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are they? What do you look at on a daily basis? And what metrics do you really look at? Because, they say numbers are the end result of behavior. So what are the numbers that you typically look at on a daily basis to say, okay, well, this is a good operator, this is a great operator, or this is an exceptional operator?
hmm Well, I like how you put that. The numbers are in the result, because I'll back up just a little bit because I have a way that I manage in a kind of a system, and it goes people, operations, sales, and profit, and it has to be in that cadence. And I teach that time and time again. So even an agenda that I have with my director of operations, or it starts with people. So the first thing I do when I sit down with her is I talk about, okay, let's talk about people. Let's talk about what are birthdays, what anniversaries are coming up, what promotions do we need to talk about, who do we have new that's coming onto the team, what does your training look like. That's the number one thing. And even with franchisees, a lot of times the first thing, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, I'll go have a franchise meeting, and the first thing they go to is profit. Mike, I'm not making enough money. I go, okay, well, let's stop for a minute. Let's go back, and they all know what I'm going to say. Let's talk about your people, and then we'll get to the profit. Because so you hire the right people, you train the right people, you have the right culture. Then they operate. That's the next thing we talk about. They operate your business at a very high level. That way, sales, that's the next part, increase, and then you manage the profit. And now we can talk about profit. But we don't. I'm not going to talk about profit at any time with anybody until we talk about people. And so once they kind of understand that that's the cadence of success, then they'll get the right numbers. On a daily basis, I think everybody is always going to look at sales. Um, they look at sales and food cost and labor costs on a daily basis because that's what you can look at. I always will look at trends. I'm a big into trend analysis. Then if you want to get even deeper, and I kind of geek out on data, I separate sales, and they're very purposely. And this is what I teach franchisees, because this is, I think, the bigger miss is that I look at total sales, obviously, but then I look at four walls as a separate business. And then I look at catering as a separate business. And I look at third party, which is your DoorDash, Uber, Grubhub, as a separate business. Because too often, what happens, I even had I'll use an example with a marketing team I had come in and said, look, we're going to do digital marketing. And I wanted to, try it out with a couple stores. And they said, hey, look how great digital marketing did at the store. And I said, well, let's talk about that. And they go, well, you're up 6%, last month. That's great. I'm going to contribute to the digital marketing campaign. I said, well, let's really look at the numbers. I said, catering was up 40% and third party was up 20%. Four walls was down 3%. So the digital marketing campaign did not work because it was meant to drive, traffic. It wasn't meant to drive catering or third party. So I said, you have to be very careful when you look at sales. because all the, now that, we're in the new day and age of, DoorDash and Easy Cater, you really can, if you're not careful, you can be lulled to sleep that, hey, sales are doing well, but you could have a steep decline on your four wall sales because of, you got to figure it out why. Or, you can plug that in for one of the other aspects, but, so I look at those, talking about KPIs, I really segment my businesses into those three areas.
So you said something very interesting, and it's funny. I was just talking Steve, who works in my office and produces the show. You met him at the beginning of the show. We were just talking about this today. You can't look at sales and expect the same result from the same number, right? So you could have a different manager run one store, a different franchisee run one store, and they can do the same numbers and have such a different result in terms of profitability and cash flow, right? So we were just talking about this because we had one manager running a store and they were doing sales. The store was up, third party was up, catering was up, everything was great, but the store wasn't seeing the same profits it should. We made a change in managers. The store was doing same sales, sometimes down because, now we're getting into summer, which is a little bit slower. And the store is much more profitable. Third parties up. The store's seeing much more cash flow. So it just shows you by running and using the right person with the right tools and the right training, whether it's, look, you can only control two things, right? You control food cost and payroll. If your food cost is higher and they're just ordering all over the board and they have so much product in the store, or their payroll's high, they have too many people on a Saturday where maybe Saturday lunch is slow, but they have 5 people working. There's so many different things you can look at that actually impact those numbers. So, we talk about marketing four walls, which is your marketing within your store. You talk about digital marketing, you talk about third party. There's so many different pieces of the puzzle that go into building sales, but who's managing those processes are so important. I used to say all the time, they come in the front door, but they go out the back door. So it's like you got to stop the revolving door and you got to keep the consistency. And that's with sales as well as payroll, right? And hiring. And, why we're talking about hiring, let's talk a little bit about leadership and building great teams. You've mentioned that several times since the beginning of the show, talking about training and the right people. So let's jump into retention and hiring and talk through for me, how you train your franchisees, because that's a big piece. Some people hire bodies, they just think, oh my God, I need to hire people. We need to cover the schedule. We put people up front. Not every franchisee and not every general manager, even for corporate stores, think about, that key person at the front is so important, right? They greet the guest, they run your operations. So let's talk through how we build those great teams. And then once we have them, how do you retain them? Because this is a whole different age now with hiring, right? I'm sure you guys are seeing it too.
Yeah, and I think the process is different, and you've seen that, I'm sure, in your corporate and your franchise store. So, one of the things is, kind of with the joint employer laws is, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of control. I don't have any control on the hiring and the employees of a franchisee. I can guide them. So, and it's one of the things we do is we always have the conversations about, why did you hire this person, or let me look at their training folder, let me look at their onboarding process. It's very specific when a franchisee comes into training. And one of the things I do to set the tone, I've done this for 8 years now with California Tortillas, I do the orientation for every single franchisee. Now the franchise consultant could be with
Do
me.
they come to you to a corporate store, or do you
They do.
actually go to them for the opening?
So both. So as somebody as a franchisee, they have to come to our training store,
Mhm.
which is in Maryland, and then we go to them to open their store. So we'll bring in a training crew.
A training team.
Yeah, to open the store. So I do, I'll sit down and do the opening orientation with every franchisee, any franchisee general manager, because I want that consistency. And then anytime we do a new store opening, I would say 95% of the time I'm doing the orientation as well, because to me, that's the kickoff. Like if you have to set the tone, it's in a fun way. And it's, I'm throwing out bags of candy for people to ask questions and answer questions. And, just to kind of, this is the culture that we have. But at the same time, there's that accountability to say, this is the rules and this is why we do things like this. And this is what, the accountability looks like. So yeah, with a franchisee, they come in and they go through with training, they go through a very specific. It's actually scripted out per day per hour. And then they do demonstration tests. They do written tests, and I've had general managers for franchisees not pass, and that's okay because there's we just can't allow somebody that doesn't buy into the concept or able to pass. A lot of times, even if it's something like, hey, look, I don't do great on written tests, that's fine. You can still pass all the demonstration tests, but if you can't pass the demonstration tests, then you just that it's not going to be a fit. So, I mean, we have pretty strict guidelines when it comes to the training on the franchise side, and on the corporate side as well, even with the hourlies. And again, when I say strict, it's really more of following the format, and it should be fun. I mean, it should be from day one. And I'll use an example. Right as we speak right now, my daughter is rolling burritos at the Annapolis Mall, California Tortilla. So that's her summer job. And each one of my sons are older; they've graduated, but we're talking about work, a little bit earlier about how everybody's worked in the hospitality industry. And I mandated that each one of my kids at some point work in a restaurant, either for me or for another company. So they
I
all have
love
done
that.
that.
I do the same thing with my kids. When my kids were little, I mean, my middle daughter made the first pizza in every Squisito. I mean, we opened one store, this is no lie, in Cockeysville, and we took one of her pictures and her holding the pie. I think she was 7, and we blew it up on the wall. And we had, it was, I mean, you got to remember, it's 45 minutes, 50 minutes from here. And I guess her friends were traveling. And they called and they said, "Oh my God, she's on the wall in Cockeysville." They texted us and said, "Is that your daughter on the wall?" And I said, "Yeah." But it's funny, it's the kids do so much when they grow up in the business. So I'm a I believe in that 100%. So I love that you do that. I mean, even Alana, my oldest, who, now has a big corporate job in New York City, even when she comes home, when we have the full service restaurants, she serves tables on the weekend. She loves it. She
Hmm.
loves it. She begs to do it. She's like, "Oh, can you do another restaurant closer to me? Because I want to work on the weekends." It gets into their soul. The restaurant business is definitely contagious.
Absolutely. Then even as my daughter was getting ready to start, this is her first summer working. She's 17. She's a rising senior, so her first summer working for California Tortilla. But I have, we do training videos, and I actually, we have a relatively small corporate group. So the owner of our company, Keith, is always the person that's cooking and making the food. I'm the one that's doing the filming and the editing, and I go back in and do the
Mhm.
voiceovers and the kind of the drop downs for any of the recipes. But my daughter was watching all these videos going into it. She's like, "Oh, Dad, that's your voice." And she's like, I go, "Yes, this is my job." She's like, I just don't go in and eat burritos all day."
That's funny. So I have to. So how many do you have? Any corporate stores? Or are they all franchised?
Yeah, we have 8 corporate stores.
A corporate. So here's my question to you. So you're out, and I'm assuming you probably do site visits, and if you're not bringing on new franchisees or onboarding or training, you're probably in the field also visiting franchise stores as part of operations. So what happens going back to the hiring and the training piece? You go into a store and somebody at the front doesn't represent your brand the right way. How do you handle that with the franchisee? Because what if it's a family member, or what if, I mean, and I ask this, I guess, personally, because we've had this issue as well. How do you address that? Because, I mean, like you said, you're not in charge of hiring, you're not in charge of firing. All you can do is massage the franchisee and push them into the right step. But how do you handle that? Because brand is so important, culture is so important. And what if this person really doesn't fit the culture? How do you
Mhm.
handle that?
Yeah, so again, it's an easy question, but it's also it's a hard sometimes to give it in concise. So a lot of this is built on relationships, Michelle, and I'm sure you have great relationships with your franchisees. So if I don't have a great relationship, it's hard to have that conversation because there's some franchisees that I have a more difficult relationship with than others. I would say most of the newer franchisees is not that way, but some of the older, but, because you gotta go and you have to be able to have that conversation, and then not to have any barriers up. But if there's immediately defensiveness, it's tough. I think I'm in a decent position with all these conversations because I started my career as a franchisee. And I've walked in their shoes, and that's a lot of things. A lot of times they can say to my franchise consultants is like, "Well, you don't know what it's like. You don't know the stress I'm under. I've got payroll and I've got rent and I've got A, B, and C and whatever. Okay, I got it, but I can't. I mean, I remember those days when I was working literally. I mean, just in if I harken back to the gas station, it was my lease was 365 days a year. I was open 24 hours. So I never ever locked my doors. Okay. So that means I have to have somebody there. And so even in the first first, I would say couple years, we had three shifts with 8-hour shifts. And so, my business partner would work, 6 to 3, then I would work 3 to 11. And then we have a night guy come in from 11 to 6 a.m. Well, I can't tell you how many times the night guy didn't show up because, you can just imagine sometimes it's a little harder to shift. So I would be working, I'd work till 6 a.m. and my business partner would come in and go, "Oh my God, you've been here for, 16 hours." And, sometimes it was even longer. So I've lived that. I totally understand. What it takes, the grit you have to put in, and how you've got good days and bad days, especially when I kind of bootstrap my financing. I had really no capital to start with, but we made it work and we were very successful. So I can have those hard conversations because I know what it's like, right? And I think that's a good foundation for me to go on. But also building that relationship, from day one when I have that orientation with every single person. And then I really follow them through the training, and then I open their store and I follow them through opening. I've really kind of built a personal, there's personal equity in that. So that when I go to use some of that equity and I have a hard conversation, I can say, "Hey, listen, let's talk about, let's really evaluate," and you use the example of, it could be somebody that's working the register. And I've had that before. That is a family member. And I can say that that person is not, that they're not representing the brand. And therefore you're going to have decreased sales. You're going to have, so how do you want me to help you solve that problem? So it's not if it's going to happen, it's how do I help you solve it? It's going to happen. So, and they know too. And I rarely have to go to, there's the carrot and the stick. I rarely have to go to the stick where I have to say, "Look, it's, and it's not about the person, it's about the behavior, right?" We always break that out. So if the behavior is the person's not in uniform, or the person's not wearing gloves, or the person is, it's an operational piece. And I can say, there's an administrative fine that goes along with that after I've communicated it, verbally or written so many times. And we don't want to do that. That's not what we're here to do. And I'm not really, I can't recall a
And you
scenario
really
where,
don't want to get to the point where you're fining somebody either. I mean, that's not a good place to be because that brings negativity. And, as the franchisor, you want to try to breed positivity, culture, brand consistency. So the last thing you want to do is kind of go in and, reprimand and, what they say, praise in public, reprimand in private. So the last thing you want to do is go in and put them down. It's hard being a franchisee, especially when, they have one store or two stores. Like you said, going from 1 to 5 is the hardest. I think 1 to 10 is the hardest. Anything over 10 is easier because, they grow faster. You have the systems, you have the support. But let me ask you a question. So, in terms of franchising, let's talk about franchising for just a minute. What advice for somebody that wants to be an entrepreneur? I read an article today that it was actually in LinkedIn. It showed up on my feed and it said, "Let me teach you today how to quit your job." And it was about quitting your job to follow your dreams, to be an entrepreneur. So now here's this person that's reading this article. I woke up, I read it. Maybe I work for a big company or I work for another restaurant company. And I want to wake up today and say, "You know what? I want to open my own franchise. I want to be an entrepreneur." What advice would you give them? How would they start? And, where should they go if today they make that decision? They read that article and they quit their job.
let's hope they don't quit the job first, right? So
We
yeah,
would hope.
right.
But the
Well,
article was a little motivating. It was like this whole long article of what steps you could take to be an entrepreneur and quit your job. I was like, well, hopefully you have a plan B in place, right?
mhm. Well, yeah. I mean, one, I always tell people to do their homework, and even when I have people come in for discovery days, I really kind of I ask them a lot of pointed questions on what homework did you do prior to coming in here, and not just about California Tortilla, and how I don't want to really hear about how, "Oh, this is a great brand and I love your food and I love your design," and that's wonderful. But what did you do outside of California Tortilla? And I always encourage people to go look at other franchisees or other franchisors, because you have to. I mean, it's not a. I know the guy that's selling my franchises is like, Mike, don't tell them to do that. But I want them to, because, and I tell them that this is the type of operator you're going to get from me, is I want to make sure you understand. I'm going to tell you how it is every time, but do your homework, understand profitability. What kind of, so when they come in, I always ask, "Well, what kind of profit do you want to make? Do you think you're going to make, and why? Yeah, have you done a pro forma?" And if they haven't done a pro forma, I give them a template and I say, I can help you fill this out. But this is, you really need to understand the financial implication, the capital implication, and not just opening a store. I think a big pitfall of franchisees is being undercapitalized. So what I mean by that is, they not the capital that costs after you open. So if you just go into it with, a barely enough money, like I did, which wasn't smart, but I didn't have, really many people telling me what to do and not to
Yeah,
do.
you
I'll
need
leave
your
it.
grand opening, 3 months of payroll. Like, you should definitely have reserves, because otherwise, I mean,
Sure.
the same thing that I'm sure we experience. The first thing they cut is marketing, which is the worst. They think, okay, well, we don't have a lot of capital. We're going to cut advertising and marketing. And the problem is, you cut advertising and marketing, you cut your sales. So, they look at things that in their mind is not important, but overall is the most important. Keeping the brand out there, marketing, advertising, getting your name out, building, connecting with the community and building sales, like we talked about initially, inside your four walls, catering, marketing, third party. I mean, all those things are so important. So capital is so important for a brand new store. So let's jump into some before we run out of time, because that happens every show. We get to 40 minutes and I'm like, no, we have so many more things to talk about. But I do want to talk about revenue streams, because that's so important, because they come from so many different places today. It's not like the old days where people just walked in the door and ordered food or sat down and ate. Now it's COVID changed how we all look at things. I mean, two things I talk about every show is COVID and AI. They're shaping the world and shaping how we dine, how we eat, how we purchase things. So talk to me about revenue streams and how important they are to your business. And, we can talk catering, we could talk third party. I mean, what do you feel is the most important that really drives the revenue for your franchisees?
Well, yeah, and I talked about it a little bit before, is really having that segmented approach. So you always have to look at each business as being three totally distinct revenue streams, and they are. You have to manage them differently, you have to market them differently, and they all have different profitability pieces. I think the third party, so I'll even go back to pre-COVID. So I was doing under 5% catering. I mean, we did catering, we were fine with doing catering, but it wasn't what we were really leaning into. Third party was almost non-existent. I mean, it might have been around that area too, maybe like 3 or 4%. Now I am doing anywhere from 15 to 20% on a catering, and same thing with third party. So 30%, a third of revenue stream for my franchisees, and some of them are even doing higher. Some are doing 40%. 30 to 40% of my revenue is catering and third party. So you can't look at it as, okay, I'll do that. If somebody orders catering, I'll do it. I'll fill the order. You really have to understand all the metrics behind that. And there's different training behind that, because a lot of times you don't see the person if you're using Easy Cater and you're using their delivery system, which I really try to stay away from. I try to get my managers or my team delivers 90% of the orders. And that could
So
be,
you actually, California Tortilla actually does their own own delivery services.
well, so yeah, like within Easy Cater, you can choose to have them dispatch it and them drive it,
Gotcha.
or you can do it yourself, right? So I do it myself. So one, to save the delivery fee, so that revenue comes to me, but also because the experience is so much different when you show up when I have a manager that comes in with a California Tortilla logo on. They're dropping off business cards, and they drop off a couple free burrito coupons for the secretary or the admin, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is great! I'm going to give these out today." We have a thing too where we give away avocado. That's our logo. We have avocado keychains, and we'll give those avocado keychains everybody, and say, you come into the restaurant this month, you get 10% off your order. So I'm not going to get that with an easy dispatch driver. They're just coming in, they're going to drop it
Oh, yeah,
off.
they don't care. They drop the food and roll.
Yeah, hopefully,
Sometimes they don't even ring the bell. They just leave it on the step and roll.
yeah. So we really we we really train the managers to do that. But even on the third party, and with, I have found this to be true with the franchisees. I've taken back the marketing on third party. I used to let the franchisees do it themselves. But what I found is that they were just buying sales. So, not every dollar is a profitable dollar. So if you're, advertising every day, it's really easy because you don't get an invoice. Like you're just getting at the end of the month. DoorDash, let's use an example. They just say, hey, you did X in marketing. We take that off your sales, and here's the rest of your money. So it could be difficult for a franchisee to really kind of assess how profitable it was. And I've had some
You know
franchisees that.
what? That's a good point, and not to cut you off, but let's talk about profitability in third party, because third party for a franchisee technically is not the most profitable platform for them in terms of their sales and where to put how they say the most bang for their buck, right? They make more money on catering. They make more money on delivering it themselves. They make more money within the four walls because third party takes a big chunk of their percentage. And then, we require them to add marketing dollars and add different pieces of it to drive more third party. So how do you protect the profitability for your operators and your franchisees using third party platforms?
Yeah, so that they, for the most part, I'll round this up, but the commission that the third party takes is 20%, and I've negotiated my rates down lower. But we add a 20% service fee, so that's relatively a wash when it comes to the commission and what we have to pay and what we get back. Where
Okay,
I think
so
is
I have a question. So California Tortilla so they charge the guest a 20% service fee,
correct.
and then the 20% that's charged. So basically, it's a wash. So there's no fee. So you don't up your menu prices. You just charge a 20% fee.
Correct. Yeah. And so that's just like, yes, round number. If you buy a 10%, $10 burrito at a store, you go in the store, you buy a $10 burrito. If you buy it from DoorDash, it's $12.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And that's just the setting that we put in on our online. And you see that with a lot of companies now. And some
hmm
even do it more than 20, but we stick at 20.
Do you list it as an actual service fee, or do you actually just change the menu price?
Yeah, it automatically changes the menu price. You don't even see,
Gotcha.
as a
Yep.
customer,
Okay.
you look at the menu on DoorDash, the California Tortilla, and it's the added 20%.
hmm
Yeah. So and we've done that for, since we got onto these platforms. And the other thing is just the marketing. So I do what's called pulse marketing, and I track it. So basically, what we do is we do not market every week. So we'll do a marketing push for 1 week. Basically, it's like a throttle. So I look at year over year sales in just third parties. So let's just use DoorDash. So I have a store that did $5,000 last year in DoorDash. I'll be looking to beat that this year. That's the mark. So I market for 1 week, and then I turn it off and I watch how long that trend will last me until it starts to throttle down, and I see it going down underneath last year's sales, and then I do another campaign. And then depending on how strong the operator is or the store is, I might go longer. So I might go 6 weeks or 8 weeks until I do another pulse. And the other part of the pulse, which is interesting with third party, is third party has an algorithm. And basically the algorithm says, what have you done for me lately? Meaning DoorDash is saying, what have you done for me lately? Are you active? Are you doing a campaign? So technically, if you have one campaign and you kept it on all year long, the algorithm is going to say you haven't done anything differently. So it doesn't put you in that carousel up as high. But if you were to do the pulse, they go, oh, you're active. Oh, here you go. Oh, you're active again. Oh, you're active again. So the algorithm gets excited, and it actually helps the business. So that's one of the things that we do is we just, and to protect that profit, and then to watch the sales and make sure there's a correlation between marketing and advertise, or marketing and sales. But we don't turn it on every day for anybody.
So, of course, the show's coming to an end. We hit 40 minutes, but we can't go without. I have to do my lightning round. I always ask these lightning round questions at the end. They're just quick answers to kind of pick your brain on the industry. So let's jump right into those. One KPI that every operator should look at on a daily basis.
So I would say If you really want to get into loyalty, you really should understand what your loyalty
Mm.
percentage is. That's a big strategy of ours now, is understanding not who's coming through the front door, but who's coming in loyalty. So we look at that metric, and that's really a big push for us right now.
Do you see more guests dining because of the loyalty program? I mean, now that you're pushing it, I mean, we've seen such an up and down, like loyalty goes up and then it goes down. It goes up, it goes down. So what are you seeing now with your loyalty systems?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is value, and I think that everybody's looking for that value proposition now. So I think we're really trying to understand the right value, and you had mentioned before, what's shaping the industry is AI,
Hmm.
and that's one of the ways we're using AI now is really to understand the customer's buying habits. So, like Michelle, let's just say let's say you're gluten intolerant. And if I'm just sending out mass, marketing on loyalty and say, come in and get a burrito, come and get a burrito, you're like, well, I don't buy burritos, but I don't know. But
Yeah, I was going to
now
say that's not, yeah,
with AI, it really can dial into it's kind of scary, right? It's Big Brother, but it knows exactly what Michelle has ordered the last 9 months and says, I'm going to target Michelle and I'm going to say, Michelle, come in for your quinoa power bowl for $5 off. And you're going to go, oh my God, I was just thinking about that. So that's exactly what you want. And that's how we're really trying to move the needle by having very specific offerings.
yeah. So what do you think is the most underrated revenue stream in our business?
Yeah, I think it is catering. I think that people in the past have said, look, catering is I'm going to package up this to go order and send it out. When it's really, you really got to look at catering as how do you make it? How do you put the hospitality into catering? How do you make it to where it's an exceptional experience, and that will exponentially drive. I mean, we have seen catering in the last 3 years go up 50%, which is crazy. We haven't seen four walls go in. So when you ask me that question, I say it's definitely the catering segment.
Yeah. All right. I got to know, what's your favorite item on the menu?
So I would say you have to. So it depends on the mood. If I'm having a tough day and I just need something, I go. My favorite thing is the nacho grill melt, nacho taco grill melt, and I get a side of honey mustard. I mean, a side of honey lime dressing to dip it in. If I'm trying to stay on my diet, it's the quinoa power bowl.
Okay. I'm going to have to try the quinoa Powerball. That sounds good. I haven't had that yet.
It's great.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, you know what I'm going to say. You know where to see me. You know where to find me. DMs are always open. Restaurantdiva.com. You can go to LinkedIn. And Mike, thank you so much for being on the show today. This is such a we've been trying to connect for so long. So this is actually great. And for those that are listening and want to find you or have questions about franchising, what's the best way to look you up?
Com. You can just go to the website. You click on franchising, and we'll send you information right from there.
That's exciting. And is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with today? Your one piece of advice, whether it's restaurant operators, franchising, what would you like to leave us with today?
Yeah, I think that I get that question asked a lot, and it kind of this goes through any industry, but I think the number one thing is people and culture, and you have to build that people and culture. It doesn't matter if you're in the IT business or the restaurant business, but yeah, it has to be purposeful. Like you really have to, you can't just come in one day and give somebody a birthday cake. It has to be something that you do and a platform that you really buy into, and we do that. I mean, not only like for every manager's birthday, they get a crumbles pack, and people love cookies.
Cookies?
They love that. We do the birthday cakes, but we also have like pin recognitions for every anniversary, and we'll do like kind of a big celebration. But it's really about people, and you really have to ask yourself, if I was to put my plan or my platform on stage and compete against everybody else, where would I be? And so if you're not at number one, you should figure out, well, how do I get my people platform to number
Yeah. Well, that's great advice because I agree 100%. Every show that I do, we talk through culture and leadership and people make people. Just when you were starting out in franchising, I'm sure you had a mentor that kind of pushed you up the path, and just like me, and pushed me into franchising and to be successful to bring me to where I am today. So, hospitality is not just way. That's why it's called hospitality, right? It's about the guest, it's about the employee, it's about people, whether it's full service or fast casual, and making the right decision. decisions. I mean, great restaurants aren't created by accident. They're created by you and me and people we work with and the people we employ and the people we put in front of our stores. So great show today. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody listening probably loved hearing about franchising and your story. And I hope we can connect face to face and not on a Zoom call.
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And for everybody listening, we'll be back next week with another episode of Dine and Dish. See you soon. Bye, Mike. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.